Thank you, Shell, and thank you, Latvia, for having me here today. Yes, Shell is an old friend of mine. He was on a board of a record company I was an owner of in the mid-1990s. And it was actually Shell who convinced me in 1995 to return to academics. I was originally a student at the Stockholm School of Economics in the 1980s, but I left for the music industry and had a successful career there. And what happened in the mid-1990s was that Shell and some other people with foresight realized that the internet phenomenon was going to be so profound that it was going to shake us and our societies to its very core. And you had to look for people who could understand that phenomenon. And I happened to be that person. I happened to be a person who was early connected. I was connected to the internet from 1987. But I also worked in a media industry. And if you work inside, for example, a record company, you understand very early on how to deal with media. And the medialization of society is what the internet is all about. Though there are very few people who work in media industries who are also academics. So sometimes you just need to have that niche where you actually combine two things and you personify a hybrid of two things that need to be connected. And the combination of media and academics is where I came in. So I was convinced by Shell in 1995, and since 1996 I've had two jobs. I'm still very involved in the music industry. Right now, the music industry is going from 10 really depressing years, the file-sharing years, into probably 10 wonderful years, the Spotify years, the streaming years. So in that sense, it's a bit similar to the Latvian economy. But it's a thrilling place to be. But I also have this other career where I work as what today would probably be called an internet sociologist. So my job is not to understand how a machine like this works. My job is to understand what this machine does to us, how it affects us, how it changes our self-image, it changes our worldview, it changes social relations between human beings in a very, very radical sense. Because this is not a smartphone, this is a predator. This is a machine that eats everything else. This is a machine that's taking over the world. And we will soon have smartphones as ideas implemented into absolutely everything in our surroundings. So the internet is no longer an IT phenomenon. It's no longer just a technology. It's no longer just a way of communicating. It's actually something that's now being implanted into everything in our environment, taking over the world. And the scary thing is, we have let this happen without knowing what it does to us. We let the internet in by connecting computers in the 1980s. We all got our computers and they made our lives easier. And then we started connecting these computers to each other. And what we've done by doing that is that we've created one huge, giant computer that we're all, 7 billion of us, connected to. And because we're humans and we're vain and we're narcissistic, we like to believe that we are in control of this huge machine, when in reality, history teaches us again and again that this machine controls us. So what is really happening now, and it's going to happen over the next 100 years, is that this machine is going to do what it wants to do. And it's going to do it to us. And the only thing we can do at best, if we're smart, is to adapt to this new technology. And that's where I'm going to stay today. I'm going to try to make us all in this room adapt better to this new technology and being humble and respectful towards it because it's now controlling us. I actually want to go back. The irony is complete, as you understand. I'm using a blackboard. You know, I'm so tired of PowerPoint. It's probably me coming from the music industry because to do PowerPoint when you speak is a bit like performing playback for an hour and a half. It gets incredibly boring. It's you know, all the slides are prepared in advance, you talk about them, and then somebody gives you an interesting question and you're stuck. Yeah, that's an interesting question, but unfortunately it's nothing to do with my next slide, so I'll stop there. So I decided to go more live, and to go more live, like be in a more close-knit environment, like if you're playing a piano in a bar of a hotel or something, and you're really doing it live, the equivalent would actually be to go back to a blackboard with a pen. So that's what I decided to do. So now you understand why I go so old school. But I want to take us back over 200 years. I want to go back to the year, it breaks. I want to go back to the year 1807. That's 205 years ago. Why? I want to go back to an understanding of where our values come from. I want to make us understand what happens to us when we hold these technologies in our hand. Because the thing is, we tend to think that we're technological conservative. We all feel a bit guilty about not having the latest gadget or understanding. But actually, human beings are extremely adept at picking up new technologies. My mother is 78 years old, and she called me last week and told me triumphantly that she just got Spotify on her computer at home, so she had thrown away all her CDs. And she's 78 years old, and now she has Spotify. She can listen to classical music and jazz while she's cleaning the house. And she decided that CDs are actually very ugly things and very boring to look at. So she threw them all away and replaced them with some, stuffed African monkeys or something like that. That's more interesting to look at. And she's 78. Because it's not hard for us human beings to adapt to using new technologies. That's actually really easy. We do it all the time. You all use your online equipment in this room. You all came here today by being online, deciding to go here to begin with. We're all living online already. The problem with us, though, is that our values are very conservative. So the problem right now is that we're using our smartphones and our laptops and our iPads, and they're controlling us. But we have values that are stuck in an old paradigm. We have the values that our parents gave to us. And these values are no longer relevant. The world has moved on, so we need to drastically change our values. So the values are connected with the technologies we're using. And that's the hard process for us, because we love to stick with old values. And again, history shows the people who can most rapidly get rid of the old values and move on to the new world and to the new values of new technologies are the ones that become the winners. So let's go back to 1807. What happens then? Well, we have two guys here. We have a philosopher guy, a very bright Alexander Bard guy called Hegel. And he lives in a town called Jena in eastern Germany, not too far from Latvia. And then we have another guy, an entrepreneur, and he's called Napoleon. Napoleon is a very angry Corsican dwarf, sitting on a white horse, with his hand stuck underneath his coat. And he's riding through Europe on his white horse. And behind Napoleon is the biggest and most efficient army the world has ever seen. And he crushes everything, including the Prussians who lived where Hegel lived. And while everybody else in Jena was terrified of Napoleon and hated his guts, who's this Corsican dwarf is crushing Prussia, and making us stand here in shame, Hegel was triumphant. Hegel saw what he called Die Weltgeist. He saw the world spirit personified in Napoleon. What Hegel meant with that was that he saw a person who was the new age. And what Hegel had realized, and one of Hegel's ground theses is that we constantly have to rewrite history to understand ourselves. The only way we can understand ourselves is by forcing ourselves to rewrite history and understand history from a new perspective. That's exactly what Hegel did. He did it in a most wonderful and totally mad book. It's called Phenomenology of Spirit, and it came out in 1807. And it opens with Hegel's fascination with Napoleon's army. What Napoleon really did was that he constructed a new system with an angry Corsican dwarf at the top, some generals here, some other officers here, and then cannon fodder at the bottom. That was Napoleon's army. Doesn't every army look like this? No, they don't. What was unique about Napoleon's army? It's probably taught in Latvian schools as much as it is in Swedish schools, that the secret of the success of Napoleon was the fact that he had the first army of conscripts. So every young Frenchman had to be in his army, whether they liked it or not. That's not true. There were conscript armies before. Napoleon's army was the first army in world history where everybody inside the army could read and write. What Napoleon had discovered was that France, being the first nation state in the late 18th century, which is exactly why they got the French Revolution, it was the first country where you could actually afford to print books in such high volumes that you could actually make everybody in that society read and write. And Napoleon used that information advantage. And that's what the Napoleon's army was about. So what Napoleon did was that he communicated his dictates to people who then got it printed and understood exactly what he was about to do, even down to the very bottom of the hierarchy. Even the cannon fodder of Napoleon's army could read and write. And what Napoleon had realized was that a soldier who can read and write is 100 times more efficient as a killing machine compared to a soldier who can't read and write. And that's why he beat the shit out of the Prussians, because they couldn't read and write. They hadn't invested in reading and writing. This is all about information flows. So what Napoleon did was that he created an extremely efficient army. It was so efficient that Hegel and Humboldt and the other Germans who learned from Napoleon realized this organization, this type of organization, can be copied. We can organize every human activity as if it was about having a Napoleon's army. So what we saw during the 20th century was that we saw the construction of armies around Europe. Sweden even copied it so hard they took one of Napoleon's generals and made him the king. You know, back then Swedish kings were fighters. They didn't sleep around with army of lover singers like they do these days, you know. They were real men back then. We built the nation state. We built bureaucracies, you know. We built the corporations. I'm sloppy here. We built the factories inside the corporations, according to this model. We even built the police force that controlled citizens in Latvia and Sweden. We built the prisons where we locked up people who didn't behave properly. We built schools with blackboards and teachers who force-fed children information. You know, I'm one of these guys who think we should give a computer to every school kid in Sweden instead of trying to copy the Prussian model, which unfortunately is what most Swedish politicians still try to do, you know? There we go. And of course, we built the hospitals. When we got sick and old and dying, we were all sent to a building where there was a patriarch walking around in a white coat behaving as a Napoleon. He's called a doctor. Doctors are the people still around today in today's society who still think hospitals are built for them, so they can look glorious and magnificent and sleep around with a lot of nurses. Whereas the rest of us know that hospitals are really built for us as consumers, and if we don't get the drugs we want anymore, we go to a website in Abu Dhabi, and then we order it, and it's being dropped in Riga the next day, so we don't have to go see a doctor anymore. As you can see, all these magnificent institutions that we built over the last 150 years originated in the insight that if we can teach people how to read and write, we can organize society in an extremely efficient way, creating enormous wealth that can be distributed to each one of them. This is a fantastic innovation. This is a great way of looking at the potentiality of a society. Hegel was a genius, and so was Napoleon. And the connection between the two, the connection between a philosopher who understands and sees what's really happening, combined with an entrepreneur, is a magnificent mix. So we should start out by being very respectful towards our parents and their society. That's the least thing we can do to understand how magnificent this is. But here comes the problem. We've all realized that all these institutions are in a state of crisis. Something has happened. And we have to dig into understanding what really happened. What happened? What was this all about? You see, this thing here starts far earlier. What Napoleon discovered and used was the widespread knowledge of how to read and write in French society. And the reason why that had become an affordable luxury, so people could read and write, was an innovation was truly revolutionary that happened a couple of 100 years before, the printing press. The real revolution was not the French Revolution, I would provocatively say. The French Revolution in 1787 was just a chaotic consequence of the real revolution. The real revolution was the printing press. Because it was the printing press that changed the condition that Napoleon could later use. So, we need to understand this again. What happens when we get these information flows and what has happened to them? Because if we have a crisis for these institutions now, it must be because the information flows go in a different direction than this one, top down. What is a printing press? Sociologically speaking, not technologically. Technologically, it's a machine. It was invented in Germany in the 1400s by Gutenberg. And by using this machine, we could mass produce text. The average cost of a handwritten book in Europe in 1450 If you would like to have a book like Söderqvist and my book, this is the American edition of our book. It's called the Futurika Trilogy. This is a paper book. Okay. If you wanted to produce a paper book in 1450, you would have to probably go and see a monk and a nun in a Latvian monastery, and they would be quite snobbish. You know, they'd be like, well, you know, there's only like 300,000 of us experts around Europe who can handwrite a book because we have this wonderful skill, we can read and write. And because there's only 300,000 of us and we're all monks and nuns and we're being very snobbish, you have to stand in line to wait for your turn. And once you get through to the monk or the nun that's going to handwrite your book, your one copy of the book, they're going to tell you, yes, I can make a copy of the Futurika Trilogy for you so you can have your own copy of the book. It will cost you 150,000 euros. In today's currency, the average cost of producing one book in Europe in 1450 was 150,000 euros. No wonder there were very few people who could read and write. It was terribly expensive to learn that art. What happened then is that if you go to 1550, a revolution has occurred. The printing press has played its cards, and what we have is a Europe where the average cost of producing one book is 30 cents. Now, 30 cents is a lot less than 150,000 euros. That means you're going to produce more books, you're going to produce them in higher quantities, more people are going to be able to afford to buy books, more people are going to be encouraged to read and write, and eventually the political systems around Europe realized that to back up the new growing and expanding industries of Europe in the 19th century, they need to make it a priority to teach every child in Latvia or Sweden or Germany to read and write. And then you can create Napoleon's army. So we need to understand that out of one machine, we created the modern book. We also created a book that came out every day, the newspaper. And the newspaper became the solid foundation for building what we today call the democratic nation state. You cannot create a democracy, you cannot create the rule of law unless you have a lot of people who can read and write. That's impossible, haven't been done anywhere. But it's been done through the newspaper and the dialogue between citizens in the newspaper. We also have paper money, an originally Swedish innovation in the 17th century, that makes it possible for us to move value between two people with ease. Before, you only had metal coins, which was incredibly clumsy, and that slowed down trade. And the more you slow down trade, the less you can specialize, the less you can benefit from an economy. So this made the economy explode. What we call capitalism is also a product of the printing press, because what we refer to as capitalism is nothing but an economy based on the value exchange of paper money. But here comes the interesting thing. I said this is a sociological phenomenon, the printing press. Radio and television, developed in the early 20th century, are also printing press, sociologically speaking, because they function exactly this way. We might laugh when we look at North Korea in 2012, where we have the dictator Kim Jong-un, walking on television every afternoon and having a presenter saying that Kim Jong-un is so fantastic, like the generous welcome that I received today. But they have it every day, Kim Jong-un is amazing and all that. Well, Sweden was exactly the same way in the 1980s. We had only one state television channel, and they said Olof Palme was amazing every day. That's it. That's the way it works when television's older you have. So you have these technologies, and they're all one and the same thing. They're connected with this worldview because the information flows work exactly like this. So there you go. Now, here comes the revolution. Starting in California in the 1970s, people began connecting computers to each other. It was done for all various reasons. Nobody really saw the visionary aspect of it. The American defense wanted to do that. The American army thought it was great because if we connect computers, then we can exchange information very easily. Universities realized that if you connect the universities with each other, they can exchange papers and ideas with each other, and they can all benefit from that. Slowly but surely, everybody realized that if we connect with other people, which we love to do, we all become more efficient, more specialized, and the economy can grow. This is exactly what happened. But what is it the internet really does? When I started working with this in the late 1990s, there was a phenomenon called the dot-com companies. The dot-com companies was exactly the type of thing you do, the mistake you do, when you use an old model and try to apply it to a new phenomenon. Basically, the underlying assumption was that this is a new phenomenon called the internet. We're going to exploit it and make money from it. And that's what we can do. What the internet really does is that it kills what you used to make money from. For example, if you would run a travel agency in the 1990s in Latvia, people would have to go to your shop in a central street in Riga and ask you how they can get from Riga to the Canary Islands and have 2 weeks off for a holiday. And you would sell them a ticket, and you would sell them a hotel room, maybe generously in a package, and you would charge them immensely for it. There are no travel agencies anymore, because people go online, they look at different airlines, they compare prices, they buy the cheapest ticket or the nicest ticket, they book their own hotels, they decide what to do for themselves, they talk to other people, they go to TripAdvisor before they book a hotel because they want to find out whether the hotel is good or not, and the only people they can trust are the people who stay there. They never trust the owners. This is what the internet does. What the internet does is that it makes the cannon fodder here in Napoleon's army talk to each other. They start commenting what Napoleon is doing. Napoleon doesn't like that, and he shouldn't. This is what it does. It doesn't create internet billionaires. It kills the old billionaires and gives power back to us. So what you do is that you start talking to each other. So these people start by commenting. They might comment, Napoleon is wearing a dreadful blue frock today. He should wear a red coat. That looks much better with his skin complexion. You know, they make all kinds of comments about Napoleon. But eventually they start commenting each other and what they do. And they lose interest. And Kim Jong-un becomes less and less interesting. And whoop, one day they cut it off. That's where we are now. That's why these hierarchies are imploding. They were wonderful when communication flowed this way. When this communication flow is cut off, and the communication is all happening here, and everything has become dialogue, nobody will talk to you anymore unless you talk with them. I've looked at the Swedish army. The recruits are now 18 years old. They've been online all their lives. They cannot imagine that there ever was such a thing as a human being without a smartphone. That's not a human being to them. That's something extremely primitive and really, really weird. If they walk out of the house without a smartphone in their pocket, they're naked. They're totally left to themselves. They hate that. That's not being a human being. A human being is a creature that has a smartphone in his pocket. That's what a human being is. They have no idea that there ever was anything else. That's their world. Now, when they're conscripts and they're brought into the Swedish army and they're 20 years old and they've never taken an order from somebody else in their lives, everything breaks down. It doesn't work. It collapses. They have no idea what to do with it. It's just like, oh, no wonder they're trying to do drones, you know, send drones instead of soldiers, because soldiers can't take orders. Because there's no way young people today are going to take orders, and they will never take orders. Because they will never have to take orders. They live in a world that works perfectly well with constantly dialogue between all parties in all directions all the time. That is their world. It might look confusing to an outsider who is 45 years old, but it works. And the interesting thing with people, once they're past 17 years old, the values and valuations they've accumulated by them when they're 70 years old, they always keep for the rest of their lives. They always did and they always will. That's how we human beings work. So if we're 40 or above 40 years old, we are going to have to adapt to their world, not the other way around, if we want to be successful. That's where we have to start. We still teach kids in schools in Latvia and Sweden that there was such a thing as the Stone Age. And the Stone Age was followed by the Bronze Age, and the Bronze Age was followed by the Iron Age. We still teach our kids this. Do you believe people during the Stone Age were aware of the fact that they were Stone Age people? You're laughing. You see how confused we are now? We don't even believe these stories ourselves. There never was a Stone Age. The Stone Age was invented in the 1850s. It was a wonderful concept because, like Hegel said, to understand ourselves, we constantly have to rewrite history. We have to give history new priorities and remove other things. There are no historians around anymore who write histories about kings and battlefields because we find such a history banal and ridiculous. It doesn't say anything about us. It doesn't say anything about how we arrived where we are now. And that's why it's become a ridiculous story. It's become an irrelevant history. And history is all about relevance. History is all we have. History is identity. When you think of who you are, you will think of an idea of you were being born, a number of years ago. And the creature being born there and the creature you are now is who you are. You are your history, and our society is our history. Latvia is Latvian history. Everything around us is history, and history has to be rewritten. So why are we teaching our kids there was a Stone Age? We're doing it just out of habit. We're doing it because our grandparents created a history that said first there was stone, then there was bronze, then there was iron, and one day we built a factory. And looking back at history from the perspective of building a factory where Napoleon's army is at work 18 hours a day, which is what the meaning of life is all about, then we have to rewrite history to understand that. And they were clever. This was the right thing to do in the 1850s, to say that to be a human being is to be a creature that tames, domesticates physical materials. That is what it means to be a human being. So history has to be the history of taming physical materials in more and more advanced stages. That is a relevant history if you're an industrialist and building a factory is the only thing that's important to you. Now look at where factories are on the planet today. Factories are probably highly automatic by now. And if they're not automatic, they're definitely not located anywhere else but in southern China, even moving out of there right now, or in Bangladesh. Okay, I got a suggestion for you. If factories are now being located in Bangladesh, they are probably not very important anymore. We wouldn't let them be in Bangladesh if they were important, to be honest about it. Do you agree with me? So why do we still teach the kids about the Stone Age in Latvian schools? Why? Out of habit. Laziness, clumsiness, not understanding what's happening to us. We need to get rid of this and understand the new paradigm. And this one I'm going to swipe the board for you. Now we're going to move on to our day and age. I said that these machines that we use, we adapt to them very quickly. We find it easy to use them, but we don't understand what they're doing to us. Let's look at that. Here we go. This is a guessing game. This is a square, and it has 2 columns in it. It is the biggest human meeting place in history, and you use it every day when you turn on your computers. You fill in a word here, for example, Latvia, beautiful name, by the way, and then you get all kinds of suggestions here. What is this? This is a Google page. The Google page is the Napoleon's army of our age. It's the model for everything else we do. Google is an incredibly clever company. They've read my books. There you go. And a friend of mine is the head of their think tank, by the way, so I love Google. The interesting thing with the Google page is that it has 2 columns. Why doesn't it just have 1? It has 2 columns precisely because we live in a paradigm shift. We're moving from our parent society and tend to keep the values from that society, and we're moving into new society using all these new technologies. And Google are clever enough to play these 2 paradigms against each other. So Google offers us a capitalist column and a column of a very different sort. Let's look at how these columns work. Let's look at the right one first. The right one is slightly smaller, but it's there. Who is number 1 in the right column on the Google page? That's where the ads are. What is an ad? Ad is exposure that you pay for. In other words, this is where the dollar and the euro signs are. Whoever pays the most is number one in the right column of the Google page. Do you agree with me? Yeah. Who's number one in the left column then? Google have an algorithm. They use an algorithm, and the algorithm has different components. But it has two key components. And this is a new principle. It looks like this. You have two components, and they have to multiply each other to create the sum of Google's algorithm. In contemporary English, we would speak of awareness. And we would speak of credibility. And these two, when multiplied, create a value called attention. And it's attention that Google wants to measure. This is what they're interested in. So how does this work? It works this way. You get scores for awareness if people know that you exist. For example, you can go to a village in Nigeria and you can ask 100 people if they know what Latvia is. Some will say they don't, some will know exactly what it is, and some will guess and guess wrong. So you can measure exactly how much awareness there is for the name Latvia in a village in Nigeria. This is what Google do all the time. Every time you use your computer, every time you search at Google, they will register your behavior. And they will find out whether you're aware of something or not. And they will accumulate this awareness from billions of users around the world and create an awareness value. The other value is credibility. What value do you attach to it? If you know there's a country called Latvia, do you think it's a cool and happening and interesting country? Or do you think it's a really boring, sad place you never want to go to? Do you think of it as a place that you might find your future husband and wife, or a place you want to go on your holiday? Or do you think of it as a place that has no interest whatsoever to you because you're far more interested in Cameroon, which is a neighboring country of Nigeria, than you're in Nigeria? Google measured this too. They measure how long you stay in a website and what you do while you're there, and if you return or if you recommend that website to other users. That is what creates the credibility value. And they then multiply these two. You can be as cool as you like, but if nobody knows you exist and you get a 0 for awareness, you're still out of the game. Or you can be something that everybody knows about, but that nobody pays any attention to, that nobody finds valuable. In that case, you get high score for awareness, but if you still get a 0 for credibility, your attention will still be 0. You need both, and they're multiplied with each other. This creates attention, and please remember this word. Because attention is what puts you number one in the left column. Please note what is not in this formula. There is no dollar sign in there. You cannot throw money at something and get attention. Why is that? How much does it cost to start a Facebook page? 0. How much does it cost to open a Twitter account? 0. How much does it cost to open a homepage? 0. How much does it cost to even start the internet in a clever country like Latvia, where internet broadband is now being distributed to all citizens, which is a very good idea, by the way. They don't do that in Italy. Nothing. The internet doesn't cost anything. It's a huge creature operating at 0 cost. The thing about us human beings, too, is that we don't like to pay for something unless we have to. So when we look at the two columns on the Google page, if the guys in the right column paid to be there, it can only mean one thing. It can only mean that they tried to get into the left column and failed and became desperate and started throwing money at their problem. That's exactly what happens with the internet. The internet is all about ideas. It's all about entertainment. It's about information. It's about social relations. It's about being popular. It's about being that kid in school that all the other kids want to play with. It's about being that clever kid you need to talk to so you can score better on your next school test because he's intelligent and he's read and understood things. It's a social monster in a literal sense. We value each other on the internet according to the information and the entertainment that another human being can provide us with. And we all want to hang out with the coolest kid. That's the internet. It's a huge global playground operating at zero cost. This means that we know subconsciously when we open the Google page that the guys in the right column are desperate. They are the Napoleons that are losing power. And they still have this one last asset that they accumulated over the last 200 years, which is called capital. And they're using that tiny little resource they still have called capital, throwing the capital at their problem, while the capital is slowly but surely moving to the guys who don't need it. That is why Google is worth billions and billions of dollars. They don't care about their valuation. They make the money anyway as a byproduct of being a social monster. This is the internet. Take a firm look at it. You already know this because you use it every day. I'm just putting words to something you were already aware of. Now, here's the real cruel thing. Google have made the left column slightly bigger, as if to give us a hint that the left column is slightly more important. You know, a hint. Let's look at the actual traffic at Google. It turns out that when we use the Google page and we do search, over 98.5% of the traffic goes to the left column. Over 98.5% of the traffic on the internet goes to those who already have the attention that then increases their attention even more. Less than 1.5% goes to the right column. And because we don't make a single decision in our lives anymore without going to places like Google first. You don't make any decisions in your life anymore without going online. You don't even talk to anybody anymore without going online. You go online and you check their Facebook page to check out what they look like, who they know, what their family's like, where they live, how much money they make, if you like. You go online today to check all the people. If you're going to talk to somebody at all, to even spend time talking to them, you need to check them out on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter first, because there's so many other people out there you could talk to instead. We already do this, all of us. You would not be here today unless you had online decided that you were going to put your physical body inside this room this afternoon. Admit that. That's where we are already. So, that's the world where we live. This explains the title of my speech today, Life After Capitalism. Ladies and gentlemen and excellencies, we have just empirically proven that capitalism is dead. This is empirical evidence. The traffic is now attentionalistic. You don't sit online and wait for somebody to pay you to go to a specific website to be informed or entertained. You would find that extremely vulgar and banal and stupid. I do what I want when I go online. And I go to places where I want to be informed or entertained, and when I can hang out with my friends that I have chosen to be with. That is what every little schoolgirl today thinks of when she thinks of the internet. That's the empowerment that interactive technologies gives to every person on the planet. And there's no way back. What happened when the printing press rolled out with its enormous force over Europe in the late 15th century was that the 300,000 monks and nuns who'd made a fortune from being these snobs who could handwrite, was that the monks and nuns walked out on the streets demonstrating. Stop the printing press now! It's killing our jobs! Nobody cared. And by 1550, 100 years later, there was not a single handwriting professional left in Europe. They were all wiped out. The same thing is happening now. There's not a single piece of evidence even to show us in the direction that capitalism will even survive in its smallest forms. Because This part, the 1.5% that goes to the right column on the Google page, is becoming smaller and smaller every month. We're all moving over there. What are the consequences? Let's look at what happened at the last paradigm shift and get back to this whole thing about values and valuations. How do we construct a worldview? How do we see our lives, the society we live in, as a whole? What we do is that we use a certain way of communicating with other human beings so we can relate to them in a certain way. And with that comes a lot of different aspects of what it means to be human that we tend to think of as timeless, although they're actually not timeless at all. They're specific for our way of communicating. So a good way of looking at this is actually to make 3 columns. What happened at the last paradigm shift, and then look at what can happen now. Here we go. We used to have a society dominated by written language. We then started printing and mass distributing information, Napoleon's army. And we've now moved into an age where all information is becoming interactive. You can no longer open a communication thread with another human being unless they feel you will listen to them. If you try to talk to somebody, they will just cut you out. The only way to communicate now is to communicate with and mean it. No other way. The patriarch is dead. So, what kind of societies do we create? Well, we had a society that was based on agriculture. We lived in the countryside. So you lived in the countryside of Latvia. And what happened was, we lived in the village, and land ownership was the basis of the economy. We then moved. After the printing press, we no longer needed 10 people to do a specific skill in the Latvian countryside. One person could do that with a little machinery. And we could move 9 Latvians into Riga or Daugavpils or some other Latvian city. So, we moved into industry and we created a new history and a new form of organization. We lived in cities. Your address was a city address, a street in Riga, if you had power. And we had money, capital as the driving force. This was my dad's universe. My dad read a book in Sweden called Taxeringskalendern, taxation calendar, you know. He compared his income with other men. Because whoever had the most money when he died was the winner. That was the point of living. Accumulate wealth. What else? We had a power structure in the countryside. We had landowners, and they were called aristocrats, and they were having dinners with kings and with cardinals. And they created a power structure where they ruled over the peasants in the Latvian countryside, and they also had something that combined them. They had a production of truths. They went to church. Signed at 11 o'clock. Boop, a solid society is formed. All based on the idea that you live in the countryside with agriculture and handwritten language. Because that's the kind of society you can create when you have those information flows. What then became so efficient was the information flows became far more efficient when they were mass distributed at very little cost. So we created in parallel a bourgeoisie in the cities. The awful Latvian cities where you had, really disgraceful, horrible people, like Germans and gay people and all kinds of things were living in these cities. All of a sudden, these guys became winners because they were located in a place called Riga. And Riga was no longer a horrible place. Riga was the place of power. Things moved to the city. And this bourgeoisie, they controlled the workers in the factories and created in the 19th century a new power structure, which ironically had a new production of truth. The church leaders were fat and lazy and sat in the countryside in Latvia and waited for the cities to go down in flames or plagues or something. That's exactly why the church was so stupid in not building any factories. It lost its power. Now there's hardly anything but old Polish ladies left to trust the Pope anymore. And that was a church mistake. I'm not saying they were wrong. I'm just saying they were really bad at strategy. Because power moved into the cities. And here in the cities, you had the universities, academic institutions like the Stockholm School of Economics that produced the truth. And they created a new identity called the nation state. We were all willing to live and die for our country. I don't know if you're willing to live or die for Latvia. Probably you are. Swedes are not anymore. They become so blasé, they have completely different priorities in life now than being Swedish. But, you know, the point taken here is that the nation state is an extremely powerful producer of identity in this type of society. But only in this type of society. And I want to complete the idea of the worldview also with to look at how values are produced. This was, of course, the world of good versus evil. It's just a few Americans who still believe in that, like George Bush, you know. The rest of the world don't believe in that anymore. Because it's an old paradigm. Like I said, it's just Arabs and Americans who still think of good and evil. The rest of us have skipped it a long time ago. Because the idea of good versus evil, and the idea that you would be rewarded by living in eternity in a heaven if you did good, is intrinsical to the way of communicating you have in that society. There's not a single example of a world, of a society anywhere in history where you had written language as the dominating form of information processing that had another worldview than this one. It's the machines that make us think in a certain way, not the other way around. What we then get here is that that's torn apart. What the universities teach us is that to control people in a city and not being criminal and being nasty to each other, you need another set of values and valuations. And we get the division of right versus wrong and the rule of law as the guarantor of that. And every country on the planet that implements a functioning rule of law has a prospering economy as a reward. That is also an idea coming out of the 19th century. But here, it's no longer the idea of eternity. It's no longer that you're going to live in another life. You know, if you work in the fields, one day you're going to be rewarded and you're going to go off to eternity and play harp or something like that. No, it's the idea that your parents, your children will be better off than you are. That's driving this idea, the idea of progress. Do you see now how you get a complete worldview out of the machine? The point is that this worldview was intrinsical to the machine from the very beginning. And the people who understood it first are the ones who became the winners. If you were in the Latvian countryside and realized, gee, I'm going to move to Riga, and I'm going to learn how to read and write, and I'm going to start a factory and tell my kids there was a Stone Age, and I'm going to organize people around me like Napoleon did with his army. You became a prosperous, successful Latvian entrepreneur, and everybody wanted to sleep with you. That's how history works. The first guy who gets it wins. And that's where we are now. You have a unique chance to walk out of this room today and go home and start fixing your Facebook page and your Twitter account and all these things that doesn't cost you anything. You can fix all these things and you can start to take control over your life and you can become a winner because you know how it works now. The point is that this is all Napoleon's army stuff. What is replacing it? What kind of society is now growing out of the smartphones into the lives of teenagers in Latvia and Sweden today? What kind of life do they live, and will they live the rest of their lives and take with them and teach next generations? It will look like this. To begin with, they don't work in factories anymore because they don't live in Bangladesh. They work in media. Media is driving everything else. If I take a bottle of mineral water like this one, an Evian, you know what? The water inside this Evian bottle is 1 cent at the most. You think you're buying it because of the water in it, you're not. You're probably paying, say, 3 euros for it. That means 2 euros 99 cents are paid for something else than water. It's called brand, and it's a networking effect. You're buying it because you think of yourself as an Evian person, and as an Evian person, you're cool. So you don't drink Latvian tap water, although it's brilliant. You buy the Evian water so you can stand there in front of everybody else who's come here today and be an Evian person instead of just a regular Latvian tap water drinker. Social relations decide everything in your behavior. That is media. So values move there. So whoever sits and designs an Evian bottle and an Evian marketing strategy and an Evian social communication strategy is dealing with something completely different than water. The water is just there. It's not part of the value anyway. Evian is basically air. We don't live in cities anymore. Do you have cards? Do you still carry cards with you? Come on, hands up if you have a card. Don't be ashamed, that's all right. You're old. Okay. Young people don't have cards and never will. It's a ridiculous idea to have a card because they have Facebook pages. So if you remember their name, you will go and find them on Facebook whenever you like. You don't need a card because a card has a name and a physical address on it, and they don't live in a physical space anymore. They've all moved to cyberspace. They live there. That's life. That's where they are. That's where they build their identity. Turn off their Facebook page and you've killed them. Literally killed them. That's not a fantasy, that's reality. Because other people can only connect with them through their Facebook page. So if they don't have a Facebook page, they do not exist. We've already gone through the principle of attention. This is a world obsessed with attention. There is no way you can attract. For example, there's a lot of young Latvians who left Latvia over the last 10 years and moved to London or Stockholm or Germany, and you're trying to figure out a way to tempt them to come back to Riga, I guess. Well, to begin with here, if you're going to do that successfully, you have to connect with them and create an attention. So the attentional value of Riga becomes bigger than the place where they already live. Then they will move. But it's all about attentional value. Is Riga a cool place to live in? Is it fun to live in Riga? Is it fascinating? Is it easier to start your own company with your friends? Maybe it's easier to start a company with your friends in Riga than it is in London. Maybe it is a cooler place than London. Maybe you can stay out in discos later at night than you can in London. Because if you can do all those things and you can then do that story, then they will move back to Riga. Unless you manage to do that and create that story, they will not move back to Riga. This is how the world works today. It's all medialized. It's all about creating narratives. And knowing Scandinavians and knowing how good they are at doing things, but how bad they are at storytelling, I would probably think that the only people who are even worse than Scandinavians at doing good things and are not being very good at telling them, it's probably Baltic people. Right. You're doing everything right in Latvia, except people don't know. Tell them. Tell them. It's like somebody said the problem with sustainability in Scandinavia and the Baltic countries is not that they're greenwashing. They're not trying to make up stories about them being sustainable. The problem in Scandinavia and the Baltic countries is that we are sustainable, but we're really bad at telling it. So we're green hushing. Tell people about what you do. They love to hear a good story. We get a new upper class of netocrats. I'm terribly sorry, but these old patriarchs are 55 years old and have loads of money. The kids could not care less and never will. But if a girl walks into the room and she's 18 years old and she has a cool blog where she talks about traveling and clothes and seeing guys and all those things, and she has 160,000 followers a day, she's probably already immensely wealthy and she's cool. And she will stay cool. Because she will run the companies of the future. Because the companies will have to offer her that position. Because she knows how to get people interested in a story. Bloggers are the new leaders of the world. They're netocrats, social monsters. And we also have consumptarians. A consumptarian is a person who's gone online, and we all go online. But a consumptarian is a person who hasn't found out how to be a successful social person online. I'll give you a couple of really cruel examples. There are a lot of people who go on Facebook, and they're on Facebook for 2 years, and after 2 years, they have 14 Facebook friends. There are other people who go on Facebook, and after 2 years, they have 4,632 Facebook friends, who in turn know another 500,000 people. That is an enormous gap. Although the Facebook pages look identical and they have the same sizes of pictures and the same length of names, what the Facebook pages reveal is an enormous difference in power. Look at your own Twitter account. Look at the relation between how many who follow you and how many you follow, and it will disclose to everybody else who looks at your Twitter account whether you have power or not. The people who follow you should be at least 10 times as many as the people you follow. Otherwise, you don't even count. Young Latvians today speak English, but they tweet in Latvian. Why? Because you're afraid your grandfather will be upset because you're leaving the language you were born with? No, probably because you just don't think. Because if you tweet in Latvian, the only people who will follow your tweets and have an interest in them are people who speak Latvian, which, for example, I don't. But if you tweet in English, which you can speak, you have billions of people around the world who can follow your tweets. And you can be their ambassador in Latvia. Had you ever thought of that? It wouldn't cost you anything. It doesn't cost. It just takes getting out of the habit of doing what your neighbor does and using that as an excuse of not moving forward. But in reality, a paradigm shift, like the guy who was mobbed in the Latvian countryside and moved into Riga and became the coolest guy in Riga and then started the factory. We can learn from that history because history is repeating itself. No matter how you feel in the city square of Riga, in the physical space, no matter what kind of stature you had, no matter what your income or your wealth was, you have an unique chance in your life right now to become a netocrat. And then all those factors are being ignored. The only factor that counts is how other people perceive you online. The only radical way of looking at the world today to understand it is to understand that this is what you're holding on to now. This is the new Felis. And you're holding on to it for a very good reason. You're holding on to it because the way other people in the world perceive you is you are your address book. And this is what this is. This is an address book. The personal thing with a smartphone is your address book. You are the people you know. You are the people who will talk back to you if you contact them. You are only as powerful and as important, as influential, as the network of people that surrounds you. Every person on this planet who will not call you back if you call them is a minus point. Start there. That's how you're being perceived by others. We are our address books, not because we've chosen to be address books, but because we're perceived being our address books by other human beings. Because that's how the online world functions. When you meet a new person today, subconsciously, the first question you ask yourself is that, who does he or she know? And the answer to the question of who does he or she know is the answer of who this person is. There is no substance left inside ourselves. What our parents believed in was a concept developed by René Descartes in the 18th century, before the French Revolution, called the individual. If you're 40 years old today, you live in what I would call a state of hyper-individualism. Like a lot of things in history, it really peaks just before it dies. It's like you're squeezing the last energy out of it. And 40-year-olds in Latvia and Sweden today are obsessed with one project in their lives. It's called self-realization. I'm going to be more myself. I have a few kilos to lose. I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to re-educate myself. I'm going to put more energy into my career. Hey, my wife or my husband are quite boring. I'm going to change them for somebody better. This is what 40-year-olds do all the time. It's called hyper-individualism, and the project they're involved with is a product of self-realization. You mention the word self-realization to a 70-year-old Latvian kid with their computer, and they have no idea what you're talking about. Oh, that's mom. She goes to the gym. She's a freak. I don't get it. Because the idea that you're realizing a self is totally alien to 70-year-old, because that's something that's alien to the online world. Actually, if we're really radical here, if we really see the truth, we have to realize that the 20-year-olds today don't even believe that there is an individual. They don't even see human beings. They live in a universe that consists only of relations. It's only the thing between two human bodies that's of interest. That's the only thing that exists. The node to which this connection is connected is of no interest whatsoever. It's Einstein's physical relativism applied to the soul, applied to the idea of what it means to be a human being, because the internet is the most relativistic phenomenon we ever developed. And now there's no way back. So they are not individuals. Individual, and you know a lot of good Latin here in Latvia, because you're really good at Latin, I know that. Individual is Latin, it means something you cannot divide, undividable. The better way to talk of the 7-year-olds is to skip the in and talk of them as individuals. There are multiple personalities in one body. The one person in that community, another person in that community, the one person in the morning, the one person at night, the one person with the parents, another person with the brothers and sisters, then another person when they talk to somebody on the other side of the planet, the one person when they play games, there's another person when they're on Facebook. There's different people all the time. What used to be a really, really serious pathological disturbance has become a winning formula. This is the golden age of the schizophrenic. The split head. The more personalities you can harbor, the more Twitter accounts, one in Latvian, one in Swedish, one in English, one in German, the more different personalities you can harbor in your body, the better off you will be. That I can promise you. There's no point in being a solid individual anymore. That idea is dead because it's boring and nobody wants to communicate with somebody who's always the same. What they want is somebody who changes all the time. That's a good friend. That's an interesting friend. That's somebody you want to know. Well, we don't go to university anymore to find out what's going on. We pick up our smartphone, we go to Wikipedia, there the information is. So the information is now produced by us collectively together and we then put it inside our pockets. Doesn't make us very wise, I totally agree. 17-year-olds are very stupid. They know even less about the internet than you do, but they use it and you don't, so you have to go home and catch up. But you know, at least you get the theory. I'm not saying 17-year-olds are intelligent in any way, because it's not very intelligent actually to put the information inside your pocket and not inside your head, because if it's not in your head, you won't process it. But that's the way the world looks, so we have to adjust to it. They're going to be incredibly stupid, but they're going to know that the smartness is in their pocket. And together with friends, they create what they call wisdom of crowds. So they do crowd behavior, because they know that if I do what my friends do at the same time, it's probably more likely I hit it right than if I try to do it on my own. That's why you can't even hire this generation on their own anymore. If you work with human resource at a company in Latvia, don't hire them one by one. You have to hire 5 at a time. Including one of them who you think is ridiculous, but actually keeps the other 4 together. Because they come in groups. They're extremely social beings. They're not individuals. That's the key. Maybe Lenin was right after all. Maybe we're all becoming communists. I don't know. This is what the web does. An identity here, and this is important, it's not created through the nation state. It's created through subcultures. These communities that young people create today, they hang on to those communities. That's exactly why the 18-year-olds in Latvia today will become the most entrepreneurial generation you ever had in Latvia. Prepare yourself. They're going to start companies like mad. But they're not going to start companies because they want to make money. They're going to start companies because they want to still hang with their friends. Because what they do is that they join 5 of them together, squeeze it together, and then decide, what if we can do what we think is fun, and turn that into something we can make a little money out of so we can survive. Boop, they start a company. This is what young entrepreneurship looks like today, and that's why I'm thrilled about talking to young entrepreneurs. Because to them, starting a company is not starting a company. It's just formalization of a lifestyle. They don't even think of starting a company unless they know who their friends are, they're going to do it with, how they're going to live together, how they're going to relate to each other, how they're going to expand this eventually, how they're going to reconnect with other subcultures. And this is where you come in. You belong to one subculture, one of them. It's called Latvia. The old nation state is becoming one subculture, but only one subculture among many others. How many friends do you have outside of Latvia? Let me give you one advice. Email them all tomorrow and tell them that from now on, you're now their official personal ambassador in Latvia. So whenever anything relating to Latvia happens in their lives, they're going to talk to you. Works. Start using the subcultures you already belong to, because you do belong to subcultures, even if it's 85-year-old men who play golf. That's a subculture too. But you are subcultural. And use those subcultures you already have. Connect with your friends and then become the ambassador of that group of friends to other subcultures. Because all we have now is subcultures. We don't have nation states, we don't have individuals, we don't have any dictator or Napoleon talking to us anymore. All we have is these subcultures that communicate in between themselves. And they're interested in communicating with other subcultures. And if you can be the connection between two subcultures, you're a winner. That's the definition of being a netocrat. What this then becomes is that we skip the right versus wrong and move on to a society of smart versus stupid. Ask a 17-year-old today how they regard values, what they look for in other people they interact with. They say, well, he's very smart, or she's very stupid. And that decides who they want to communicate with. Being smart is understanding this, preferably intuitively. Because if you understand this intuitively, you're smart, and if you're smart, you're a winner. And they have no patience. They want things to happen around them all the time. And you can only relate to them. You can only communicate with them. You can only see them as a potential future customer for your company. You can only have a relationship with another person today if you understand that they're looking for the feeling of an event. If they can't feel that things are happening with you or around you, if you feel boring, if you feel out of touch with things, they will lose contact with you. It sounds tough, but it's the truth. Look at what you're doing online yourself. You don't stay in a website that's boring and uninformative. You leave it. And you give it bad score at Google, whether you like it or not. And you move on to another website that's more informative and more entertaining, and then you try to make friends with the people who are there. That's how the internet works. I've run out of time. Time's up. So we're going to have some questions and answers, I think. I'll just leave you with these thoughts in your heads. I'm sure you're the people who can do something with it. Start with the subculture of Latvia to begin with. It's a beautiful subculture. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. Thanks for your thought-provoking visions. May I kindly invite you to the chair for the questions and answers, and I hope I can introduce my colleague, Manta Zalatoris, to help me with the questions and answers session, and I hope that all of you will use this opportunity to provoke Mr. Bard back, as he has done to you this last hour. So,
there is no Mr. Bard here. I'm a schizophrenic individual, so I have no prestige. If you can kill this hypothesis, I'm perfectly happy because it gives me excuse to write a new book.
I hope so, they will do. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Ansis. Thank you very much, Alexander. I think you deserve an Avion.
Okay. I'll drink the water and forget it's an Avion bottle, yeah.
Basically, the whole thing is that Alexander told that he does not really like to be in Napoleon's army, but all he did for an hour, he dictated. So now actually there is a time for the interaction. And we will see how his theory works over here, whether you have some questions for him or not. So my suggestion is that we speak to each other. Basically, whomever would like to asks the question, and Alexander has an obligation to answer. Wonderful. There are two people with the mics around here. So you just raise up your arm, and then you get the mic, and then you ask the question. If you don't ask the question, I will ask the question. But I have only 3 of those. So it will be boring. So anybody having the question right away?
Over there.
One over there, please.
Hello, my name is Erik Madsen. I have just a very simple question to Mr. Bard. Who will win, the internet or the tax authorities?
The internet will win, because historically the new paradigm always won, meaning the tax authorities might still be around 100 years from now, but they become far less relevant. Farming did not disappear. That's exactly why I used 3 paradigms, so you could see the comparison. Farming did not disappear, and we still have farming in Latvia today. But when you buy a package of great Latvian bacon, for example, the actual value of the bacon you pay for, a very small amount of that goes to the farmer. and the vast majority of the money goes to the netocrat who created the attention for the bacon package and the factory owner who packaged it inside the bacon. So you're actually paying for the bacon, 50% goes to media, 30% goes to the factory, and eventually a few percent trickle down to the farmer. So
How
this is
many
just,
percent does it go to the tax authorities?
5% maybe. Okay. The bacon tax, yeah. But my point is that what happens when a new paradigm comes in is it's not that it kills the old paradigm, but that it becomes an overlayer that dominates over the old paradigm. So industry is still there somewhere, automatic or in Bangladesh or whatever, but it has a far smaller part of the total economy, and farming even further down. So this is what's going to happen. The internet is going to take over and control this. I give you a perfect example of something if you work with internet strategies. A term that I hate is online marketing. There is no such thing. Online is communication. There's online communication. Marketing is something you do with mass media. Marketing is placing an ad. Marketing is what you do in newspapers, you can do it on radio, you can do it on television, you can even do it in books. But you cannot market anything online. You can only communicate with something online. And I think it's a really important thing to stress here, because if you're putting up a strategy for your company, don't ever let anybody come in through your door and charge you for doing online marketing, because it's a total waste of money and time. I guarantee that. But if somebody comes in through the door and tells you, I belong to subculture, my subculture has 50,000 members, and I like your product, I like your service, and I'd like to introduce you to my 50,000 friends. Do a deal right away. That's what online communication is.
Great. Look, a question here. You spoke a lot about attention. Attentional economy, attention credibility. But for us, 40 years olds, we don't know how to create attention. Can you share a little bit, how do you, in practice, create an attention?
I think you are creating attention already. What I'm doing now is only making you aware of something you're already doing. You are online. You have Facebook pages, you have Twitter accounts, your companies have home pages. You know perfectly well that your company does not even exist anymore if it doesn't have a home page where you present your products. You spend money, you spend time, you spend energy, you spend ideas, you use your connections to improve your home page all the time. People already do these things. That's the good news. There's a lot of good news in what I talk about. I'm only making people aware of something they do already, and I'm telling them basically do more of the same. Go more in that direction. What I'm saying is that look at yourself and your life situation, and look at the attention you're already generating with other people, and make more out of that. And if you do that, you'll become, one, you become more powerful, and two, you have to spend less money. If you can move into the left column of Google, you don't have to spend money at all. And I think it's about realizing the kind of attention you already produce in the eyes of others, and then just increase that and stay focused with that. Work on your own credibility in the eyes of other people, and work on your own awareness. Make sure other people know who you are. Make friends outside of Latvia. You know, that is the key.
Any other questions? And I have, the gentleman here in the first row. Here we go.
Thank you. If we've moved from land to money to attention as the currency, what is kind of a dystopia, at least to me, is a world where attention also wins over content. So how do you see that balance? Because a lot of what creates attention to some people is crap, and to some people maybe interesting. I don't know.
No, the equation, it's in the equation already. Credibility, one half of the equation is content. And the content is created by the person who receives it. Now, you might think that we live in a world of angry birds and stupid games and all that. We don't. Not even kids do that. Not even young people don't do that. And the thing is that we might like to play games when we get a machine in our hands, the first thing we do. But after a few years, you get tired of that. And the one thing we as human beings always look for in the long run is quality. And content is what you mean with quality, I assume. So qualitative information, or qualitative entertainment for that matter, is what you actually look for online after a while. I don't ever do studies of what people do when they've just got a computer in their hands. That to me is banal, because they learn to use how to use the tool first. I start observing people once they're 5 or 10 years into the process of using interactive technologies, because by that time, after 5 or 10 years of use. They start to use them in the way they will for the rest of their lives. And that's when we expose the real pattern. So you don't have to worry about that at all, except that what is content, what is qualitative information, what is a good theater piece or a good piece of music or a good book to read, is something that used to be decided by a Napoleon. For example, a literary critic or a theater critic would decide that for us, and we would all just go along to the theater in Riga that had the play that got good reviews. You don't read reviews anymore. When you want to find out which theater play that would fascinate you in Riga, that would challenge you, that you would like to see, when you think of which art gallery in Riga you want to go to find new inspiring art that challenges you and changes your patterns of behavior and makes you a new expanded human being, when you want to meet a new person and have a love life or whatever, all these things, you're looking for quality, but you decide what is quality, and you decide it by going to your friends and even to friends of friends to find out from their experience which is the place to go. So we have, as a mass, become the critic rather than an individual critic. One of the old patriarchs that you don't even think about, but I love to slaughter in my lectures, is the fashion designer. There will be no fashion designers in the future. Big fashion companies today, like H&M, for example, already know everything their customers do when they walk into the store. And they have already realized that they get so much information out of their customers' behavior inside the shops and online that they can kill the fashion designer because they become better at designing what the customer wants if the customer becomes the designer. Except the customer doesn't even have to be aware of it. By your behavior when you walk into an H&M shop in Riga, you're already designing the next generation of clothes that they put out 3 weeks later. So the fashion designer is another one of these Napoleons that we're killing right now. We're killing all these authorities. And authorities then trickling down into group behavior in crowds. That's where we're heading now.
Fascinating. Another questions? Over there. One of our, no. Gentleman in the first row. Thomas, I think.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, okay, we have two there.
And then a person over there, yes.
So what does this mean for democracy? I mean, the traditional democracy is very much based upon at least the second paradigm. What will happen to democracy in the new interactive paradigm?
What we call democracy today is a power structure tied to nation-state governments. And the sixth chapter of the Netocrats book, the first book, the sixth chapter, is a really scary dystopy in that sense. It's the death of democracy. It's the death of democracy in the sense that it becomes less and less important. Politicians have less and less power over our lives.
So what becomes important? Because what you're telling is really scary.
Yeah, it is.
This is something
power trickles down into the networks. The networks are not transparent, and the networks are not horizontal. They're vertical. The thing is that the new power structures are between the networks. And some networks are incredibly more powerful than other networks are, and this is what I study in my work. That means, for example, on a individual basis, that a person with 4,600 Facebook friends has far more power than a person with 14 Facebook friends. A person with a blog that has 160,000 followers obviously has far more power and influence than a person who has a blog with 11 followers. And this is how the internet looks all the time. And this is killing democracy because you choose which blog you read, and you become one of these 160,000 people who follow a certain blog, but you don't choose that blog in a ballot box. So a lot of the power is now moving out of democracy and out of politics, and is moving online. And online, we don't vote. The only way you can vote online is by leaving something and go somewhere else. And actually, your behavior there is completely controlled by what crowd you want to belong to. You can't choose that much anymore. And this is problematic. It's extremely problematic. It's creating a stasis that we call plurality. It's a very chaotic world, where actually what really creates value is who can help you sort out the mess. So the haystack is now so big, you can't find the needle. You need a magnet. And if somebody provides you with a magnet, they get the power. That's what Google do. Google do not produce products or services that they charge for. Google do nothing else but curate information. And they've accumulated enormous power and will accumulate even more power by creating information. In a very near future, Google will probably be more powerful than the United States government, according to this theory. exactly for that reason. So don't become a politician because you won't have many followers. That's exactly why people are leaving political parties. The only reason why young people don't want to join political parties is not because they find it boring, it's because they find it has no relevance to them. It's not a way for them to get access to and control the world, because political parties can't do that anymore.
Look, the question, if I'm not misunderstanding, is coming from the banker. So what would that imply to the banks and financial system of ours?
It means that the financial system and money flows and banking is part of an old paradigm and will be part of the old structure beneath that. And the only way to create more value out of that, you can either stay that way and then you're in a smaller and smaller and less relevant market and perhaps you can handle that well. But if you look at how can you create value on top of the fact that you have access to money when people need money, how can you connect that like a social lifestyle? So, for example, a certain blogger has a certain bank account in a certain bank. That's just a primitive example of that. But this is how it goes. From now on, you need to create another value on top of what you used to create, which was financial value to people,
Did you see
if
good
you want to be a
examples of
major
that?
player.
Did you see good examples of the theory that is already working, except the Google?
PayPal. PayPal is far more clever than any bank on the planet. I can take from the music industry, Spotify, an idea developed in Sweden and launched in 2005, is now alone as a company worth 4 times more than all the world record companies combined. PayPal will probably likely be worth far more in 5 years' time than all the world's banks combined, for example, because it makes transition of money value smooth and simple between people. I'll give you an example. Latvia is far more advanced than Germany. Because in Germany, if I take a taxi from the airport in Munich to my hotel, I have to pay cash. How utterly old-fashioned. That's Germany. Germany is a scarily conservative society. Besides the fact they're selling machines to the Chinese right now, I think they'll have a lot of problems 10 years from now, because they hate everything new in Germany. We like to think that we're modern in Latvia and Sweden because we use credit cards. And because the internet is free when we check in a hotel and all those things. And that's as Latvia is an extremely modern country compared to Germany. Sweden is the same way. The problem is that why do we even use credit cards? Why don't we make all our payments with the cell phone? Because we all have one. We should have done that already. Do you know which is the first country in the world where over 50% of payments are made through mobiles?
Where?
No, Kenya. Kenyas. Which means, if you sit and develop a mobile payment system at a bank in Latvia today, you're going to have to pay for Kenyan patents to make that system work. Just goes to show again that those who are hungry and see an opportunity out there, which could perfectly well be in Latvia rather than Germany, have a unique chance right now, at this moment of history, to get ahead. Just be clever.
A question over there.
Yeah. You gave us a very cool figure before. Only 1.5% of people actually click on adverts, and all the cool young people are clicking on the relevant links, right? And I guess that number is also decreasing with time. But 97% of Google revenue actually comes from advertising. So it's basically Google is leeching off old, uncool people who still click on adverts, and of people who want to pay for that. So as the time passes and those people extinct, what happens? Will Google die because it will run out of money?
No, you're missing the point. Larry Page and Sergey Brin did not start Google to make money. That's my answer. You have to find out why they started the company. Ask them. They started the company because they wanted to make a better world by processing information more efficiently. The fact that they do make money and that they become billionaires is a side product of the real mission. What motivated them to start Google, what motivates them to go to work every day, is that they really believe they're going to make a better world by giving the internet to everybody as a new tool. Their purpose is not to make money. It is if you buy Google stock, probably, but not for Sergey Brin and Larry Page, and not for the people who work at Google. So they're attentionalist to the core. The most important thing for Google, and this is interesting, the most important thing for Google is to be here when you put search engine on the Google page. They practice what they preach. And they would have disaster meetings, I assure you, if Bing or Yahoo or somebody was ahead of them on their own page. There you go.
So what you're telling us actually is that we should live life, we should do what is it exciting for us, and if we are successful, and the others will follow, and then the money will follow.
Yes. Just like if you moved to the city and started the factory and people told you, if you move to the city, you will have nothing to eat. I kid you, every Saturday, every farmer of Latvia would storm into Riga to try to sell their produce. Money is not a problem if you're socially successful, because people will throw money at you if you are socially successful. Look at Google and learn. If you become a social monster, money will come your way as a byproduct. That's given from this theory.
Hey, social monster, it sounds scary. Why should we become one?
I think we are.
Already?
I think we are social beings. We are not solitary animals. Polar bears are solitary animals. They have no oxytocin hormones in their systems. They even kill and eat their own children. We don't. We are social beings. We're a very social animal. We like to hang out with other people. Actually, if you leave a little child alone, it will die. It will die from oxytocin shortage. That's how important other people are to us. We are social beings. The internet is in this way. It's both scary and it's new, but it's also a dream that's being realized. Maybe the original dream of all human beings being interconnected with each other as if they were one being together. And I'm looking for that for my fourth book, actually, of what I call the metaphysics of the internet, of is there a dream here that we always had as human beings that's finally becoming realized, actually, through the internet? A dream we never thought could happen that's now happening. And I'm looking for people right now around the world who felt that and believe in that, and they try to make that their mission, that this is a dream come true, with enormous potentials, obviously. And that's going to be our fourth book, actually. I'm interested in that a lot, the metaphysics of the internet.
Before we go to the next question from the audience, you mentioned to me earlier that you have some good news for Latvia. I think you already gave a couple of good news. What are the mega good news that you have?
Education is key. And infrastructure.
Who told that?
It always was. It always was. Over the long term, beyond the euro crisis, beyond the awful crisis you had here after 2008 and 2009 that you did handle very well. But beyond that, the bigger picture over, say, 50, 100 years is all about building infrastructure. And you know perfectly well that the countries of the planet that invested in railroads in the 19th century became the most prosperous countries in the world in the 20th century. Basically, North America, Japan, and Western Europe. Those became the wealthiest countries on the planet 100 years later. It's the same thing all over again. And I'm very happy about this. When I check in a hotel in Riga, the internet's for free and the broadband is fast. That's a good sign to me, because that's not given if you travel around the world today.
Especially if you're in Italy.
Italy's a nightmare. Italy is worse than most countries in Africa when it comes to internet connections. And that is a bad sign we should take seriously. Because if you have cheap or even inexpensive internet broadband connections for people and connect people to the rest of the world, and you educate them on how to be socially successful, which is what I think education should be all about from now on. Give every kid a computer to begin with, you know. If you do those things, then you have a very solid foundation. Then, of course, you need rule of law, you need macroeconomics that are functioning, all these things. You need the old structures to also work, because it's on those structures that you build the new structure. You have to have food to eat, you have to have a job to go to, you have to have an income and all those things too. But that's a given. On top of that, you need this idea of being a social creature. And I think, to be fair and honest about it, Latvia has a lot given for it. It's in the right place of the map. And whereas a lot of Latvian people are concerned that so many young and entrepreneurial Latvians left the country over the past 10 years and moved to the UK, moved to Germany, moved to Sweden. Look at India and China, you know. The 70 million Chinese in exile were absolutely instrumental in creating the Chinese miracle over the last 20 years. In a networked global society, it's an advantage to have thousands of wonderful Latvian ambassadors outside of the country's borders. It's something you can use to your advantage. You don't have to lure them home. Sometimes a young Latvian living in London can be more of an asset to the Latvian society and the Latvian economy by staying in London. So don't see that as a problem. Asia and Latin America is full of countries that are prosperous today because they have huge exiled communities. And actually, it's the countries that have become isolated, that nobody's leaving, that are having the most problems adapting to the new globalized world. So that's not a problem, actually. And language. The key here is the English language. It used to be British language, then it became an American language. This century, the English language will most of all become an Indian language. But it's still the global language. And all you need to learn besides Latvian is English, because if you speak English, you can speak to everybody else in the world, and you should. The bigger your network outside of Latvia is, the more powerful you will be in Latvia too.
So basically what you're telling is give a kid a computer and basically teach him English.
Give the kid a computer, teach him English, and make sure that if he runs into problems while he's using the computer, he talks to other kids his own age who can help him to become more social. The point here is we will become consumptarians or we will become netocrats depending on how we use that computer.
Excuse me, is there a way in between the consummarian and the netocrat?
I think there are. I think we all have consumptarian behaviors and we all have netocratic behaviors. When we're looking for brand value, we're netocratic. When we're looking for the lowest possible price in something, we're consumptarian. There's a lot about this in the book, so you can read the Futurica trilogy if you want the details on how these things are structured. But the point is that the more netocratic you are, the more netocratic your child is, the better off your child will be in their lives. So the best gift you can give to your child today is to make sure they're successful social beings online. Not only give them a computer, but talk to your kids about what they're doing online. If they're sitting alone playing games without interacting with other people, that's a bad sign. That's a waste of time, to be honest about it. But if they're using the online world to connect with other kids and learn from other kids and make friends around the world, maybe friends they will have for the rest of their lives, they're building enormous social capital. They're building attentionalism for themselves that they can use for the rest of their lives.
Thank you, Alexander. The time is running out, but we still have a time for a couple of questions. And here is one person who would like to ask.
Thank you. Alexander, I want to thank you for a great marketing speech for me, because my company is making software for smartphones. Come to us, we are very
Congratulations.
cool, and we will bring you to the bright future.
Are you exporting your products and services from out of Latvia?
Sure.
Good. That's what Latvia needs.
Yeah. Now the questions, like a bit proactive. Alexander, do you think that we don't need the government anymore? Can we cut them off?
You still had farms. Again, why do I use 3 paradigms as a pedagogical example? To teach us that the old structure doesn't disappear, but it becomes more marginal and it becomes less important. We still need governments for the old structure to stay in place, because if it doesn't stay in place, we cannot build a new structure on top of it. But governments are becoming less influential. And that's exactly why we get less involved in elections, less involved in political parties. It's a sound reaction to give other things more priority, because power is moving from politics into other areas of society, and it's moving especially online, where political parties are becoming less relevant. How we're going to deal with that is a different topic altogether. But it's a sound reaction to leave political parties and engage yourself elsewhere, because your power, you will be more influential by spending your time somewhere else.
Yeah, but you told very good about media, about newspapers, about I don't know, books, everything, yes. But you don't told a lot about how it works, about the government, how government will work in this new world. How it could work online.
The thing governments will be forced to do, like everybody else, is they will have to adapt to what happens online. So the government's main preoccupation from now on, to be relevant at all, is to make sure that your internet connection works. That's the #1 priority for governments today.
Okay, thank you.
That's exactly what we're talking about the future of Latvia here. What should you invest in? That's a governmental issue. What should you take your Latvian tax money and invest it in? And I say infrastructure and broadband, and that's exactly what you're going to invest in, and you're being wise doing it. That's what governments do.
Well, I hope only that helps. The last question from the audience. Who dares?
There we have
The ambassador. Whom else?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for an extremely thought-provoking lecture. I think you have proven that we are entering or have entered into a new world where old patterns have been broken down. We are in a new society. We are moving on to a world very different from the one we have known, at least those of us who are a little bit older than the 17, 18 years you were talking about. But there are also challenges and dangers, I think, in this new society. One such which you didn't mention, but is cyber terrorism, cyber warfare, which is something it seems many governments are focusing a lot on at the moment and are very worried about. And you've seen some examples of it in recent history, but perhaps you could say a few words on that issue, the vulnerability. And also another thing is that when old patterns are being broken down in the way they are, with what you call this cannon fodder communicating to one another and so on and so forth, you also have what you probably would call Napoleons who don't agree with that. And you have countries, China is one example, Iran is another example, where they do everything. They put absolutely enormous resources into making sure that these networks, when they are set up, are being thoroughly controlled and that all information are not being let through. Really enormous resources.
Well, they're desperately trying.
North Korea is another example. So could you say a little few words about that and what
Yeah,
you think will happen?
And there's a very tragic underside. It's a very, very good question. The strength, my credibility as an internet sociologist is based on one simple fact. And it was that when I started working with this 15 years ago, I decided not to be for or against. Never go into the discussion of is this good or bad? Because good for some, it's bad for some. The internet creates as many problems as it solves. Let's start there. And I give you the irony of it all. The Netocrats first became a bestseller in Sweden, then it was translated to English, and all of a sudden it popped up in the weirdest places. And within 2 years, Jan Söderqvist and I were visiting Brazil, South Africa, India, China, and Russia, where the book had become a bestseller. Wonder why, you know. Who is the hungriest out there? You had the BRICS countries. And we ironically became bestsellers in those countries before the BRICS term was used. Nothing happened in London or New York. Our book was originally published in England. Pearson had really bad sales figures in the UK. It's like nobody cared or nobody got it or whatever. But the book became a huge hit in South Africa and in China, so they didn't really worry. But it fascinated me and John. And it turned out when we came to South Africa and we asked people, why do you read the book and why do you love it so much? They said, because you've killed the myth that there's a third world. There never was a third world. The last trace of colonialism was the idea that there's some kind of an inferior third world that can't help itself, which was, of course, just racist nonsense. You know? Then September 11 happened in America, and suddenly our book became a bestseller in America. And it turned out that our American publisher, who'd first had a flop book called The Netocrats, had realized that there was a scary last chapter of the book, the 11th chapter. And there was even a line, a sentence in the 11th chapter that said, in the very near future, we will see people or groups of people arise that take ideas from old paradigms that really should be relevant for our age and then mix them with the new interactive technologies and create a lethal cocktail. And they're going to create the terror and the wars of the 21st century. What we described 3 years before it happened was in really horrible detail, we described what September 11 was. And after that, I started giving a speech, especially to American audience, that I called, From Facebook to Al-Qaeda, the internet is a monster. Because the only way to look at the internet is that it's a monster that creates as many problems as it solves problems. And of course, we should give priority to the things we can do right now for good. But we also have to understand that the internet is going to create enormous problems like cyber warfare, cyber terrorism, all these things that we have to get around. And nation-state governments, dictators are going to try to control us. They do all the time. They always did. They always put a camera in the corner of the room and observe everything we do and register it, just like H&M do when we go shopping for fashion. Governments do in every street. And all governments do, even the democratic ones, try to control us by keeping the information about us. The young generation today will do everything they can to sneak out of that bubble. That means if you're young in Cairo or Damascus, or you're young in Riga, or you're young in Stockholm, or you're young in Beijing, you have the same attitude towards government and the way governments try to control you. You want to sneak out of that. The next 10 years will see an explosion of what I call virtual gated communities and secret email. For the simple reason that we don't want corporations and nation-state governments to know what we're doing. And
why?
Because if you can hide your information from governments and from corporations, you'll be much more powerful. because then more people want to talk to you. It's called, there wasn't even a word for that before we started working on it. We had to invent a philosophical concept for it. And that philosophical concept is called the principle of imploitation. Imploitation being the exact opposite of exploitation. I just found something that's valuable to people, and I decided not to share it with others, and thereby keeping its value. That's called imploitation. And that's what's happening now in secret networks that both criminals and young people are building to get away from nation-state governments and to get away from big corporations. And I can assure you one thing. I don't have empirical facts for it, but I'm pretty sure. Nobody is more innovative when it comes to inventing secret networks than Chinese teenagers. It's precisely in countries like China and Iran where you have the most to gain by staying away from government networks, that you are most likely to develop technologies that keep your information between you and your friends top secret. And this cat and mouse race is going to happen over the next 50 years. The pirate movement politically, WikiLeaks, all these things are just the beginning of a big, much bigger general trend, which is a new generation of netocrats trying to stay away from nation-state governments and corporations, for good and bad. Because a lot of what they do is also going to be criminal. And there's no way we can hide from that.
Thank you very much, Alexander Bard.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
Thank you so
very
much.
much.